2001. And what really drove it to being implemented was that once the free trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico, the NAFTA agreement, ran its course, all goods traded between the three countries became duty-free. So if you had your NAFTA certificate in hand, the HS tariff classification you presented to Canada Customs wouldn't have mattered as much because the goods were going to be duty-free just based on NAFTA alone. So Canada Customs was finding that importers weren't as concerned about the declarations being provided to them. Therefore, the data they were receiving was skewed, and they're big on wanting to know exactly how many apples and oranges come in and what those values are, so that when we're entering trade agreements with other countries, we have accurate data to base our decisions on. The duty of care. Declarations using the HS tariff classification system can have a direct impact on cross-border supply chain, on your profitability, and your brand reputation. All errors, clerical or otherwise, are considered negligence by customs. So what is the harmonized system? Well, it's a system of approximately 5,000 headings and subheadings covering virtually all articles in trade. If you were looking at it in paper, I'm looking at it on my desk right now, it's about 2 feet thick when you add the explanatory notes and other information to it as well. Thankfully, it is now online and much easier to scroll down and find what you're looking for rather than flipping through 2 feet of paper. The HS system is arranged in that it's organized into 99 chapters, and those 99 chapters are split into 21 sections. Along with the general interpretive rules and legal notes to the chapters and sections, these will form the legal text of the HS. Many of the chapters are structured in at the beginning of the chapter covers the classification of raw or basic materials, which then progress through to manufactured articles found later in the chapter. For example, chapter 76 would cover aluminum and articles of aluminum. Now, the beginning of that chapter would illustrate aluminum ingots, powder, bars, billets, and sheets of aluminum. The chapter then progresses to the classification of finished articles of aluminum, such as ladders, containers, tableware, kitchenware, hardware, many other things. These are found at the end of that chapter 76 covering aluminum. Quick sip of water here. The structure of the harmonized system. Under the HS system, all products are described by a 10-digit number that is broken down by chapter, heading, subheading, and commodity code. The example provided is a dual control polished chrome sink faucet. So this example is found in chapter 84, which reads machinery and mechanical appliances. You drill down to heading 8481, which covers taps, cocks, valves, and similar appliances. The subheading 848180 is for other appliances, hand operated. Tariff item 8481800000 is really listing the above, but made of other materials. It may not be of iron or steel or plastic. And the commodity 8481800072 is the complete 10-digit harmonized system number for this faucet plated dual control. Now, the international level, which covers the first 6 digits and which all countries signing up to use the harmonized system should have this same item classified to that same 6-digit level. That's in theory. Does it happen in practice? Obviously not, because so much of the HS system can be subjective. But at the international level, you would have this faucet chapter 84, or sorry, in chapter 84, the heading would be 8481, the subheading 848180. That should be universal to anyone using the tariff. In Canada, the country-specific level, we would add the last, or sorry, the 7th and 8th digits, which are zeros, as the tariff item, and the last 2 digits, 72, as the classification number within Canada. So the first 6 digits represent the international portion of the classification number used by all countries, and the last 4 digits reflect Canadian tariff and statistical requirements. Just an important thing to know about that is that the AMPS penalties are not applicable in Canada if it is determined by customs that the HS code declared is correct to the 8-digit or tariff classification level. There is no penalty to importers if the 9th and 10th digits are incorrect. But if the HS code is deemed wrong prior to the 8-digit level, the importer may be subject to an AMPS penalty. So we're at the halfway point, and I'm just going to go back to Justin briefly to see if there are any questions, common questions coming in that we can deal with now that you might want to send, and if not, we'll continue on in a moment or two and take any questions at the end.
All right, thank you very much, Tony. At this point, we'd like to ask if there's any sort of questions out there, if you'd like any clarity on any of the points that Tony's already covered in this presentation. Please do so now. Like I said, use the ask a question function on the side, and I'll get Tony to answer them or provide a little bit more clarity if there are anything needed. Otherwise, we will move forward with the presentation. I'll just give it a few more seconds here. All right, we don't see any questions coming through, so we'll continue on with the presentation here.
So what are the classification rules that govern this HS system? Well, there are 6 general interpretive rules that are to be followed when classifying any commodity entering a country using the HS system. So it's a rule-based classification system. It's determined by strict application of these general interpretive rules, of which there are 6. And within those 6 rules, rules 1 to 4 must be applied in sequence. You can't pick 1 or 2 before 1. If you haven't exhausted, your goods should be classified based on rule 1, whereas rules 5 and 6 stand on their own. And the next 2 slides will have the rules. These slides contain the 6 general interpretive rules to the harmonized system. All countries that have signed on to the HS system also agree to adopt these rules as their basis for determining the correct classification of all commodities entering their country. So, in a perfect world, your widget coming into Canada, going into the US, going into France, going to Germany, would all be classified to the same 6-digit level in a perfect world. Following, I'd like to just provide an example of the use of the 6 general interpretive rules in tariff classification. We're going to take a look at a bicycle imported into Canada in a knockdown or unassembled condition. Now, bicycles have a non-NAFTA duty rate into Canada of 13%. Most bicycle parts have a non-NAFTA duty rate of 0 or duty-free into Canada. So if we look at General Interpretive Rule 2A on your screen, that rule states that any reference in a heading to an article shall be taken to include a reference to that article incomplete or unfinished, provided that, as presented, the incomplete or unfinished article has the essential character of the complete or finished article. It shall also be taken to include a reference to that article, complete or finished, presented unassembled or disassembled. So based on Rule 2A, your bicycle, being unassembled, cannot be classified as bicycle parts and enter Canada duty-free. It must be classified as a bicycle with a 13% non-NAFTA duty rate applicable. So, tariff classification. There are more than 5,000 HS codes found in the harmonized tariff, and it's important to be aware of the following when trying to determine the correct code for your product. First, remember the 6 general interpretive rules always apply. Then there are legal and explanatory notes which can be referenced for guidance in choosing the correct HS code. And these may, at the 4-digit heading level, give you guidance that if you have this type of item within what you're looking for, go to another area, or it doesn't go here. So you can find guidance in the legal and explanatory notes. And on top of that, you can also research the Canadian D-memoranda or US-based classification rulings found in a system called CROSS. And that CROSS library can also be accessed to aid in proper classification. What it is really is a compendium of rulings of products that the US has provided, and just to get a starting point or to get where the US has gone with certain classifications, it can be a valuable tool as well. Products that are difficult to classify. So if you all just take a brief moment to review the enclosed list of these products that are often difficult to classify under this HS system. If any of you import large volumes or high dollar amounts of products listed in this slide, obtaining a classification ruling from US or Canadian customs is a real prudent step to take, as it'll provide you with classification and costing certainty. Obtaining a classification ruling really is as simple as you or your service provider submitting a letter to customs and requesting their opinion on the item or items in question, and include with that letter descriptive literature or samples with your request. Once received, customs will respond in writing, advising the HS code they believe is correct, along with their reasoning. And within their reasoning, they will always quote the applicable general interpretive rule. They'll include that with their reasoning for the code they have chosen. Once your product has been ruled on, you now have what customs likes to call reason to believe as to the correct HS code applicable, and must now import the goods in accordance with that ruling. Should you disagree with that ruling, you may import, say, your first shipment after the ruling under the parameters of the ruling, and then you have an appeal available to you to protest that entry as to where you believe it should be classified, and again start that appeal through a different process. But once the ruling is in place, you're bound to follow it. So let's have a tariff classification small crash course. Following 2 principles, it can usually be followed. First of all, named parts of general use have their own unique classification. For example, fittings, nuts, bolts, seals, and it goes on and on. Pumps, motors, gears, drive shafts. There's probably more named items than generic. And secondly, parts and accessories committed exclusively by design may use a catch-all classification. For example, brake parts, steering parts, transmission parts, wrapping machine parts. If they're not named, but they are specifically for a certain end use, you can go to that end use part provision. So here's just a bit of an illustration on this slide as to unique classification should be utilized or the catch-all. We're going to deal with a rubber gasket, and that rubber gasket would first of all be in heading, chapter 40 as rubber and articles thereof. The heading for it would be under other articles of vulcanized rubber other than hard rubber. Subheading 4016.93, gaskets, washers, and other seals. And tariff item, these gaskets, washers, and other seals used in automotive goods of chapter 87. And the final 10-digit number, complete number, gives you gaskets. In this, if perchance this gasket happened to be for use on any of the items on the right-hand side of this slide, for instance, it's used in brakes, it's used in radiator, it's used in a suspension system, transmission, steering parts, it still remains classified in 4016 and 93.10.10 as it is specifically named in the HS tariff there. On the other hand, If you were importing, say, a ring, a shim, a disc, an item that's not specifically named in the HS tariff, and those items were for use on any of the items listed on the right-hand column, then it would be okay to classify under those items, as long, again, as the ring, shim, disc, or whatever it might be are not specifically named. So usually, catch-all classification, there's a part or accessory is committed exclusively by design for only one use. And customs defines a part as something that's an identifiable component of an article, a machine, a good, and it's integral to design and essential to that function for the product for which it's used. As opposed to an accessory definition being an article performing a secondary role, and it isn't essential to the function, it has a specific purpose, and it can improve the effectiveness of the host machine, equipment, or apparatus that it's used for. The distinction between a part and an accessory becomes important in that although your item may physically be attached to a certain machine, vehicle, farm implement, whatever it may be, if the classification you are considering only covers parts for that machine, vehicle, or farm implement, and your item is clearly an accessory, it would be incorrect to use the part's HS number, even though it's attached to it. A very simple example would be a CD player designed for automobile use only. The CD player is not integral to the operation of the vehicle, and although it will be only mounted to a car because that's the type of CD player it's designed as, it must be classified as a CD player in the harmonized system. I'm going to go through a bracket case study, as over the years they were one of the more tougher items to classify for a number of reasons, and lots of them are used for many things, and a lot of them are used in automobiles and buses and so on. So per the slide, an automotive bracket has two areas in the tariff that will warrant consideration, that being heading 8708 and 8302.30. Now, Canada Customs has published a D memorandum on automotive brackets to provide guidelines, and I've just got a bit of the verbiage for it, and after I read it, you'll see why they had to publish a D memo. The memorandum states that automotive brackets, which constitute an essential part of the vehicle, specifically designed to be part of the chassis or frame of the vehicle, and constitute the mounting base upon which other major components are designed to be attached, are to be classified in heading 8708. Whereas brackets attached to the coachwork, brackets incorporated into vehicle door handles, brackets for blinds, and brackets used to attach hoses to radiators are to be classified in heading 8302.30. So I think the above example really demonstrates the very technical nature of the tariff and the problems that arise when attempting to correctly classify certain commodities. In the case of these brackets, it really forced Canada Customs to publish a D memorandum to provide importers with guidance in this area of classification. So to summarize the HS classification process, I would suggest the following recap. First, determine what your product is made of and what it is used for. Then, is it an item mentioned by name in the HS tariff, or may it just have a generic name and isn't found anywhere by a specific reference? If it's not specifically named, is it committed by design to one specific end use? After you've answered those questions, you'll want to review the general interpretive rules and read the relevant legal and explanatory notes of the HS codes being contemplated. You should then also access support tools such as the US Cross Library or the Canadian D memorandums to see if your product or one similar to it already has a ruling or a published guideline. So understanding your risks in this HS system, and there are risks. Canadian Customs have reduced the sample size they now review when conducting an audit, but they're systematically increasing the amount of audits they initiate. Customs will provide the importer with a written report of each audit and outline any enforcement and remedial action required at the conclusion of the audit. Your customs broker or service provider should definitely be notified at the beginning of the audit and provided with both the interim and final reports. Canadian Customs have the ability to go back 4 years from date of entry on errors in tariff classification, which can result in potential payment of duties and AMPS penalties. A product imported over a long period of time is still subject to any duty and AMPS penalties owing once Customs deems an incorrect HS code has been used. And you just can't go to the fallback, well, you know, I've been using that HS code for years. No one ever advised me it was wrong. It won't cut it and can't be used to mitigate any liability on the importer's behalf. Remember, as the importer, you ultimately own the compliance and financial risks associated with the HS codes being declared to Customs on your products on your behalf. What are the costs of non-conformance? What liabilities can you be subject to? Well, border crossing delays. Perhaps you've misclassified something that really shouldn't be under the control of another government department, but because you've misclassified it, CFIA or Transport Canada wants to get involved and your driver's at the border. Well, until that gets resolved, that truck isn't going anywhere. So you ultimately can have supply chain disruptions. Financial penalties just through misclassification after the results of an audit are found and you have misclassified something and it was clear and evident that it was wrong, they will slap you with AMPS penalties after that audit. You may lose the use of free trade agreement duty rates if the misclassification transformed into the NAFTA certificate being incorrect as well, because one flows to the other. NAFTA is based on the premise of starting with the correct tariff classification. There can be additional customs fees involved, increased enforcements by the way of Customs examining your shipments more, auditing you more. Again, drivers getting to the border, containers arriving at port and being scrutinized longer and in more detail than if there's no infractions on your record that Customs reviews before deciding to release or exam. This can increase in your cost of goods sold and then obviously reduce your profitability. And just as important, it can add damage to or provide or have damage to your brand reputation. Now, you might read the slide and wonder how an error in tariff classification would have anything to do with your brand reputation. So I'll try and provide a brief example. There was a recent article in the Globe and Mail regarding an importer of pizza kits, and these pizza kits contain shredded mozzarella cheese and sliced pepperoni. One of the importer's largest clients of these kits was Pizza in Ontario. The kits were being classified as other food preparations in heading 2106 and were duty-free under NAFTA. Now, as you may or may not know, importation of dairy products is highly regulated into Canada. And in order to import cheese into Canada duty-free, you must be issued a yearly quota from the Department of Foreign Affairs in Ottawa. Any importer of cheese without that quota is subject to a duty rate of 245%, and that is 245. Now, after auditing this importer, CBSA determined they were circumventing the government's quota system and deemed that the product should be classified properly under the HS system as cheese and therefore dutiable at 245%. Now, obviously, this importer had to discontinue importation of the cheese and could no longer supply pizza with one of their most critical ingredients. The importer's brand reputation was most definitely compromised, and they'll likely never be a supplier to that customer again. Now, this was a very high profile and severe example of the ramifications of incorrect tariff classification. However, it's not uncommon for non-NAFTA products going from duty-free to say 2, 4, 6, 8% and higher after importers undergo a customs compliance verification audit and classification errors are detected. So what are the best practices approach you can install in your business to mitigate and alleviate these problems happening and you running into the penalty box with the customs regime? First, always a good idea to educate and ensure your supply chain partners are aware of their responsibilities in supporting the HS code declarations that you're making to customs. Try and assign an internal champion within your organization who has a basic understanding of classification and also realizes the financial and other liabilities attached to incorrect declarations. In conjunction with your broker, monitor new or changed parts regularly. I would suggest at least once a year. This will ensure accurate HS codes have been assigned and are being consistently reported to customs. And finally, always a great idea to engage a specialist as needed on any new or difficult classifications, especially when you anticipate importing large volumes or large dollar amounts of these products. So you want to recognize that tariff is the foundation of trade. There is no doubt that global sourcing has now added value to our country, allowing us to be more competitive. But along with that comes complexity. So you need to understand that governments are escalating enforcement actions to ensure the benefits being realized by importers are legitimately being claimed by these importers. And that tariff classification and NAFTA are essential to customs targeting and risk management. Therefore, undetected errors can have a huge effect on importers' bottom line and brand image once uncovered. I'm going to tell you that you will be audited, so have a plan. We have found that whether you bring in 100 shipments a year or 10,000 shipments a year, there's no rhyme or reason as to the pecking order of who gets selected. But we've seen large importers and we've seen importers with 50 transactions a year or less. So one day you will receive that letter in the mail. So have a plan. When possible, obtain indemnification from your suppliers on large volume, large dollar items that will provide you with recourse should the reclassification of their product by customs result in monetary penalties and retroactive duties due to an inaccurate description or misrepresentation of the goods purchased. Communicate regularly with your service provider. Address any areas of concern as soon as they're identified. Sooner or later, you'll be audited by CBSA for tariff classification, so the time to prepare is right now. I like to think the 80-20 rule is definitely applicable when trying to identify your risk. Most likely, 20% of the tariff classifications used by you account for 80% or more of the total value of the goods you're importing. So focusing on that or obtaining tariff certainty on that 20% is going to go a long way to reduce your risk of being assessed additional duty and AMS penalties. So have a plan and get started now. Well, it was my pleasure presenting this webinar to all of you, and I thank you all so much for your time and attention. Please don't hesitate to contact us with any questions you may have on this or any other trade topic for that matter. I'm going to turn it back to Justin now, and if there's any questions coming in, I'll be glad to deal with those. And thanks again, and I hope all of you have a great afternoon.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tony. If you have any questions or you want any more clarification on any of the points that Tony hit, by all means, ask the question now, and I'll read them as they come through. I'm just going to run through the wrap up here. So, I have one question come in. All right, we have a question in regards to refurbished parts. How would refurbished parts be classified?
Refurbished parts are treated the exact same as the original part. So if you were bringing in a motor, it would be classified in the exact area that the motor would have been classified prior to the refurbishment. The only caveat to that is if you've imported that motor into Canada, now you send it, for instance, to the US to be refurbished. On the way back, Canada Customs is only looking for payment of the repair work or the refurbish work or value done to that motor. And under the provisions of NAFTA, even if that motor happened to come from overseas originally, you got it in Canada and sent it to the States for refurbishment. The NAFTA agreement provided a provision where repairs and alterations can be done in one of the 3 NAFTA countries and no duty is applicable. So there is no separate tariff classification between a new motor or a used motor. It takes the same 10-digit code. However, in this specific example for repair or refurbishment, if that repair work was done in the US, Canada, or Mexico, there'd be no duty applicable.
We got a few more questions here. And the next one is, if we apply for customs ruling, how long does the process take? How long is the ruling in place?
Great question. Generally, it will take them anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to a year. And I know that's unfortunate that it takes that long, but depending on the commodity that you're asking for, that's the best time frame I can give you, 3 months to sometimes a year. They will, when they receive your request, they will send you back a letter acknowledging that ruling request, giving it a file number, which then allows you the opportunity to follow up on it with a specific individual. They'll tell you who that ruling request was assigned to, but 3 months is probably good. 6 months isn't bad. A year, yeah, that's a little long, but we have seen it take that long. And of course, it'll depend on the complexity of the item that you're requesting, because the region may quite often go to Ottawa to gain clarification or clarity if it's a difficult classification. Oh, I'm sorry, a second part of your question. Once that ruling's in place, it's in place. If you are happy with the ruling and you abide by it and you classify your goods accordingly, and you're audited, unless Canada Customs came back and overturned it in writing to you, as long as you follow the guidelines of that ruling, there's no AMPS penalties should you be audited for that specific item. So the ruling stays in place until Customs decides it should change and would notify you in writing, or you're not happy with it and you wish to pursue through another process of appeal to get a different classification in place.
Okay, we have another question here. Is there a time frame where it is expected that only electronic submissions for clearance will be allowed?
Yes. The time frame really is now per se, where all of our declarations on behalf of our clients are sent electronically. Now, is there can you deviate from that? Yes, at certain non-automated ports, or if you choose to come to Canada with the goods in your own vehicle, you can create a complete paper package that is handed in to the border crossing where you arrive and account for the goods that way without prior electronic transmission. But Canada Customs, through a new program called e-Manifest, which should have been in place and will ultimately be in place, will want all goods reported electronically, not just by the broker, but also by the carrier. They'll be making a separate electronic transmission. But to answer your question, there still is a way to get it done with paper if that has to happen.
Okay. Does GHY clear packages going to and from Europe?
No, we do not do that. We're solely based in the US and Canada. You know, we can provide classification opinion on your goods that you're exporting there. But no, we do not handle shipments going into those areas, just the US and Canada.
Never mind. There's one more question here. Is there a document where imports can, sorry, hold on here. Lost my screen. Is there a document where imports can refer to for precedents concerning commodities referring to CBSA and had a final ruling?
I'll have to, if you could email that to me online. If you could email that to me online, I will check. Definitely there is on the US side. I just have to see if there's a publication that can be accessed on the Canadian side. They are confidential, and I don't know if Canada's gone the same route as the US, where they can be, or there's a compendium of them for public access. So I'll take that email offline and give you an answer. I should add to that last question. Canada Customs will provide guides to tariff classifications when they see a reoccurring product that is difficult to classify. So they'll issue a tariff guideline from time to time on specific items that is accessible for importers. But the actual library of rulings that various importers into Canada have received, I'll look into that. I don't think so.
We have another question here. How do we find out if there is a current ruling in place for one of our items?
Again, for the previous question, I can't tell you that because the ruling, if it's assigned to company ABC, is confidential to them. And in Canada, that would not be published that I'm aware of publicly. Is there another way of generically seeing if Canadian Customs has ruled on a certain item? I'll look into that. On the US side though, their cross library gets very specific as to who requested the ruling, what the product was, and what US Customs determined the final classification should be. So they're very public and open with it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tony. That's all the questions I see coming through now. Again, if you have any more, just please ask them while I do the short wrap up here. So thank you very much, Tony, for that incredibly educational discussion. And thank you all for attending today's GHY University webinar. We really appreciate it. And as stated before, we will be sending out shortly the recording of today's webinar and the slide deck, as well as a survey regarding your experience today. GHY is incredibly appreciative of your support, and we want to make our future webinars even better for you. So we ask that you please take that short, less than 5-minute survey to help give us a better understanding of what can create that better experience for you. So if you would like any more information or clarity regarding tariff classification, please contact Tony directly at tony@ghy.com. That's tony@ghy.com. And feel free to connect with GHY International via Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter as well. Thank you again for attending today. Please look for our upcoming webinars later this year, including Tariff Classification Part 2, NAFTA, and the Cloud. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.